and welcome back to another episode of the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast, bringing clarity to entrepreneurship, business, and optometry. I am your host, Dr. Harbir Sian. Thank you, as always, guys. I'm truly so grateful that you would take the time to join me here to learn and to grow. And as always, right off the top, before I get into it, I always ask a quick favor, which is if you've been getting any value from previous episodes, or if you get any value from these upcoming episodes, which I am very confident that you will, please do share it. Send a link to a friend. Let your colleagues, because these next few conversations, as I'm going to go into, are going to be extremely important for us as Canadian optometrists. So please do share this. Send a link to your friends and colleagues. Text it. Put an Instagram post, LinkedIn post, whatever you can do. I promise you, I will be truly grateful every time I see that. And I think our colleagues across the country will be better for it and be grateful that you have shared this content with them. The next 6 episodes over the next 3 weeks are going to be part of what I call the Future of Canadian Optometry, presented by Aqueous Pharma. And the Future of Canadian Optometry is a series of 6 conversations with 6 leaders in the industry, leaders from different organizations within the industry, that are going to really help us shed light on what is the current state of optometry in Canada, what is the future for optometry in Canada, what do we have to look forward to, what do we have to be careful about, what kinds of information can we learn and glean from people who are at the top of these organizations, who are making a lot of the decisions that are essentially determining the direction that our profession is going in. So that is what the Future of Canadian Optometry series is all about. And it's 6 interviews with the following 6 people, which I'm sure once you hear the names, you'll understand why these conversations are going to be so important. Dr. Alan Ulsifer, who is the CEO of FYidoctors. Dr. Darian Angle, who is the VP of Business Development at Iris, part of the New Look Group. Mr. Bill Moyer, who is the GM of Specsavers Canada. Mr. Rick Gadd, who is the president of Essilor Canada. Mr. Alfonso Cerullo, who is the president of LensCrafters North America. And to really round off the conversation, Dr. Carrie Salzberg, who is a successful private practice independent optometrist based in Ontario, who really truly understands what the sphere of optometry is right now and what direction we're going in, and somebody who I would think is really at the cutting edge, at the front of the curve here, as far as like what is the leading technology and what can we expect to see in our industry moving forward. So starting today, every Tuesday and Friday for the next 3 weeks, you'll see a new interview just like today's being released and hopefully popping up into your podcast app so you can listen in right away. And I think that after having recorded these interviews, I am confident that you're going to walk away from each one of these interviews with a different insight, with a different outlook on the profession. Some cases positive, some cases maybe not so positive. And I'm really grateful for the guests who have come on, who have been mostly very candid and open to answering the questions that I've asked, in some cases very directly, questions that I think that we as optometrists should be asking. And most guests have been open to answering these questions head on. Once in a while, you'll see a guest give the more corporate answer that sort of dances around the question. But I think every guest with all of their answers will kind of speak for themselves where they stand and what they think of optometry in Canada. And we're going to start with today's episode, which is with Dr. Alan Ulsifer, the CEO of FYidoctors. And I think this is a great episode to start with because Al is actually very candid and very open, and even says it right off the top. He's not the best at kind of being secretive or sugarcoating or answering in a very kind of corporate way. He likes to just be himself and answer very openly, which I think is really fantastic for us as the rest of the optometrists in Canada, trying to really understand what a large entity like FYidoctors is doing and what they see as being the future of optometry in the country. And without further ado, here is the very first episode of the Future of Canadian Optometry series presented by Aqueous Pharma. This interview is with Dr. Alan Ulsifer, the CEO of FYidoctors. There it is, guys. I hope you love it. All right, Dr. Alan Ulsifer, thank you so much for joining me here on the 2020 podcast for this special conversation about the future of Canadian optometry. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much for the invitation, and I look forward to our chat.
Yeah. Well, as you know, and as as many of the audience will know, a couple months ago, I put out a little bit of a call out, if you will, to some of the larger entities and organizations in the industry here in Canada, and asking yourself and others like yourself to come on and share your thoughts on where the profession was heading and some of the changes that are happening now. And so I do really appreciate you taking the time to come in and join this conversation. I know that that initial call up may have seemed to felt a little uncomfortable for some people, but I know that you are not afraid to tackle these types of conversations. So thanks for coming on to do that. You are, of course, in quite a unique position, being the CEO, being the head of FYidoctors, this large entity in Canada. I imagine you've seen a lot of change if you haven't been involved in the change yourself directly. And I imagine that you're privy to a lot of conversations that many of us are not. Whether you're able to share some of that information publicly or not, I do expect that unique perspective will be invaluable for the masses. The average optometrist who is wondering what's going on in our country, what's going on in our profession. So I hope that you're able to share as much as possible, as much as you're comfortable sharing, and hopefully we can have a candid conversation about that.
Sure. I'm comfortable sharing most things. Obviously, I do have NDAs, but
Sure.
my reputation in the company is my idea of keeping a secret is telling one person at a time. So that has been said about me.
That's amazing. I like that. So let's start with this. From your perspective, how would you describe the state of optometry in Canada today?
Well, I think, from a clinical side, it's a very exciting time, with advances in technology, try new treatment methodologies. So our importance as a profession in the community, is as high or more high than it's ever been. So the state of the profession for what we do, how we help people, I think has never been better. If we look at kind of the more industrial
Mm,
approach, the commercial, our profession, our industry has been uh, an area of interest to a lot of people outside the, immediate community for a long time. I talked early days, 14 years ago, when we formed FYidoctors, a lot about, consolidation is coming, private equity. I talked about Specsavers at that time and the impact that they had on the market. And I've talked, over the years about, how other markets have been disrupted. So, yeah, we have a lot of outside people looking at the profession, looking at the industry with lots of money that they want to put in to this industry, not for the sake necessarily of investing in the profession, but more, how do they get involved in what they see as a very lucrative opportunity and profession. So money is a key factor. And, we're seeing obviously in BC with the injection of cash that Specsavers is making, even just the $10 million in advertising for a market that size, no one's ever done that in the history of our profession in that particular area. So again, a lot of entities are looking at this as an opportunity.
yeah. What would you say is the opportunity that they see in the profession and in Canada in particular?
Well, I think there's an opportunity to, in their mind, make optometry practices more efficient by consolidating, more efficient on supply chain, all kinds of areas. I mean, the cold hard reality is that independent doctors, and this was a big part of why we formed, FYI early days, as independents, you're just paying more for everything from a supply chain perspective. Even now, today, from a marketing, social, online reputation management, all of those things are just more and more expensive for an independent. And they see, again, utilizing capital to consolidate as an opportunity to really, drive very high returns.
So you're, as you mentioned, of course, you're one of the founders of FYidoctors. Now it's been well over 10 years. Some would consider that, you haven't amazing foresight there to think that consolidation was important and to come together as a group was important. What was it? Do you feel that consolidation is the only way for the profession to survive, or is private practice still going to be a viable, way to practice?
Look, it wasn't really about survival. So when we formed the company, we had a couple mantras. One was consolidation is going to happen, regardless. It's a reality. So why can't a bunch of doctors do it? And
Mm-hmm.
that way define what an eye exam looks like, create a different narrative in the marketplace around what eye care should be. We had this tagline called Doctors Defining Eye Care. So it was much less about, hey, consolidation's a savior of, the profession. But consolidations happened in a lot of industries, and it hasn't necessarily and usually been all that great for the profession. That's just the reality. And I'm not talking about just optometry. I'm talking all kinds of healthcare disciplines where, in the United States and abroad, everything is being consolidated. There's more capital on the sidelines than there's ever been in history, and health is seen as a safe haven and a great opportunity, to deploy that capital. So it was really less about, saving optometry, because we knew there would be consolidators and competitors, but we had an opportunity to drive our destiny. And yes, capital and money is important. So, by working together, making some compromises, we've been able to do things we just wouldn't have been able to do on our own.
And what would you say are some of the upsides and then the downsides of the consolidation? You mentioned that it's not always positive for the profession. What would be some of the negative things that you see potentially happening in optometry or that you've seen in other industries?
Well, I guess the biggest thing is the biggest negative is, do people other than optometrists get in the exam room? Do they decide, your hours, how many patients you need to see? What are the procedures that we do or should be doing versus the procedures that we shouldn't be doing? What's the feeling around investment in technology? Is that seen as an opportunity? Is it seen as just simply standard of care, the right thing to do? Or is it, financial engineering methodology where if it makes financial sense, we do it. And if it doesn't make financial sense, we don't. So those are the big, pros and cons. So if the answer to the first part is yes, now we have more capital to invest in those things, again, let's face it, it's costly to be, state of the art in our industry. So yes, if by getting together, all of those things are aided, then, it's a great story. If, on the other hand, that money is not going back into the exam rooms and to technology, and it's about driving the behaviors of the optometrists, then you have, some pretty significant negative potential. And if we look at, even just south of the border, some of the optical entities where there's quotas for optometrists in terms of how many patients they have to see an hour, I don't see how that can be good for the profession. And again, sometimes when you mix financial people and healthcare practitioners, there is misalignment. And, that's always the risk that's going to be out there, whether it's private equity or a corporation or even, another optical entity. Those are the questions that we have to ask. Is this helping the profession be better than it was on our own? Or is it a way of financially engineering the business for the sake of maximize profitability? So can it be good? Yep. Can it be bad? Yes, as
Hmm.
well.
And would you say you've seen examples of that? So you're mentioning down in the States, you've seen specific examples of that type of thing happening where that financial entity is dictating some of the things that are happening within the exam room, and the way the doctors are practicing?
Correct. The management team of ultimately there's a management team that executes, if it's a majority ownership situation, that management team is a is set to execute on the vision and the strategy, of the owners of the business. And again, sometimes that may misalign with, what's best for the patient. And yes, I've seen all kinds of examples, and I'm not picking on private equity, by the way. There's some fantastic private equity roll-ups in healthcare, where it is all about high-end clinical care, doing the right thing. And it's those entities that have seen the value in that kind of brand. So that, Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic kind of approach to healthcare. So yeah, private equity, and we'll talk about money at some point, a little bit more later. Yeah, I mean, that can be a really good story.
Yeah.
Are they telling people in their marketing how important healthcare is versus the, spray and pray marketing message of cheap eyewear and, pretty people wearing glasses, right? So it's really all in the messaging. But guess what? There is an opportunity to be very profitable and be very high quality. Give the best patient care. Let the doctor do their thing, however they want to. There's value in that. And some investors see that and some don't.
Yeah. So on that value side of things, or creating the perception of value at the very least to the patient. If you have a patient who's looking to go to a service provider, an optometrist, they want to get an eye exam. How does an optometrist, how does a clinic, how does a brand create that perception of value when when a patient is selecting a clinic that they want to go to? How would they say, well, this one looks like they're going to give me the best eye exam? How do you think that we would do that?
So I think first of all, it's understanding, the consumer, and one of the advantages of having a minority partner is they do a ton of market research. So we've always done market research, but we've never done more than what we have lately. So, I have done a presentation or two on some of the results, and there's some brand new stuff, that we just got out of Canada. So the reality is, I think we need to understand the optical consumer. And out of these studies, we do have very different mindsets of the optical consumer. The McKinsey broke it down into kind of four, or five categories of consumer. And years ago, Luxottica did research on this as well. And it's funny how the categories were pretty similar, with one exception. So if you'll indulge me, I'll jump into that, and that'll
Please do.
probably, be a better framing for answering the question about what does an optometrist do as an independent to win and survive, in the marketplace. So,
Yeah.
So first of all, the independent can do very well and has done very well in markets where, even over 50%, is a value-driven market. So first thing the research showed us, and similar to the Luxottica research of years ago, was they broke it down into four categories. That budget-conscious person where they don't care about looks, they don't care about fashion, they don't care as much about the eye care. They just want the cheapest possible glasses, period. That's all that drives them. On the other extreme, then you have the quality seeker that wants good quality eye care, wants good quality product. Brands might be important, they might not be important. If they are perceived as quality, that's that quality seeker. There's the doctor loyal patient. That's about 30%, by the way. So no matter what, they're going to buy from the optometrist and see that optometrist for all services. And, the other category that McKinsey had kind of identified as, and it ties to some of the disruption that's going on right now. They call the style seeker. So this is a person that wants great fashion. They might want to own a couple pairs, 3, 4, 5 pairs of glasses even. They like how they look in eyewear, but they don't want to pay that much. So they're very value driven. And they've identified that that is about 16, 17, 18% of the market. The budget, purely budget seeker, is around 20, even up to 25%. So you've got these different competing segments with value, and price being more important than what it was in the old days with the Luxottica study, where they said 18% of people was budget price. They didn't have a style seeker component, because if we think about it, it probably didn't really exist. We had value, but we didn't have the Warby Parkers, the Bone Looks, the Bailey Nelsons, the Oscar Wileys that, have this kind of cool vibe, appeal to the millennial generation. It's not seen as poor quality, it's just seen as good value. And, a lot of the research, by the way, is showing that they are gaining traction, as much as the story often sometimes is, oh, people will go try them and they always come back. That's not what the data says. So we as traditional optometrists somehow aren't capturing that, that image for the new young, consumer. So when we go back to, how does the, optometrist succeed and do well? And, in markets where, again, over 50%, the UK, Australia, yes, there's not nearly as many independents. In the UK, the top three biggest chains make up 80% of the market. And if you look at the United States, where the Vision Monday top 50, biggest optical entities, 10 years ago, if you added the top 50 together, it was about 24% of market share.
Wow. Okay.
Today, it's in the low 30s. So there is more consolidation, but North America is still very much dominated by independents, more in the United States, where the numbers are in the low 60s. In Canada, it's in the 50s. So how do you win? Be mindful that you have to execute, you have to invest in your practice, give amazing service. A lot of these studies talked about loyalty as well. So as you can imagine, the style seekers and the budget conscious consumer is not very loyal, compared to the optometrist, loyal consumer, who are very loyal. But loyalty is really driven more by emotional factors. And that's the primary target. Then you look at other things like price, selection, technology, all of those kinds of things. The one great thing in the Canadian market is that quality eye care, technology, knowledgeable staff were hugely important, more so than that same consumer in the United States. So there's hope. Just execute really well, invest, be conscious of styles. One thing that was shocking to me, in these studies is the difference between that brand consumer in eyewear, that they want a brand. And study after study after study, both in Canada and US, show that segment shrinking dramatically, to the extent where, I've often felt like optometrists have felt, hey, I got all the brands, I'm going to be safe. Well, that's less of a story according to the research. And again, I do think optometrists have to think about, having an affordable offering, for patients, especially in this world where there's going to be more and more noise. So like it or not, TV, radio, social media, like there's going to be more and more about price. And again, people don't want necessarily to buy inexpensive frames, but they want to know that they're getting good value and that they have a choice. So again, execute, invest in technology, make sure you're talking about what you're doing so the patients understand what is the test that you're doing, because the category of expert is in any industry an absolutely huge term to own. And independent optometry has the ability to maybe not own the expert category, but certainly be up there. And, in those markets where it is, 80%, chains, independents have done very, very well by, sticking to what they're great at and doubling down on, being a great doctor and having a great staff and great technology.
That's great information. Thank you. That market research is really important, and I think one of the things that smaller clinics or independents, or again, I use the word average, and I hate to use it because I feel like it sounds demeaning, but I don't mean it that way. I just mean sort of the masses, that middle of the bell curve, don't have access necessarily to that information, or not at their fingertips at least. So to be able to share it, to let our colleagues know, what types of people are out there, what types of consumers are out there, is very important. Where do you think the price comes into all of that? Let's say I'm executing, I'm being an expert, I'm offering the latest technology, but a patient walks up and sees X number of dollars for an eye exam. Do you think that plays a role in their decision to come in?
It absolutely does play a role. So the consumer research is very, very clear that price, is important. What was interesting about it in Canada, at least, was that even though price was important, and if we look at the style seekers and the budget conscious consumer and add those two together, we have something in the 40 percentile where price is a big factor. Okay. But does that mean that they're avoiding the optometrists? It appears that today no entity has captured that. So 85% of those people seeking value are seeking it in multiple, places. So they've not identified a brand or banner that owns that. I do believe that will change and is changing, will continue, where you may have an entity that, really goes after that to own that. Can they own it from both a budget and a style, be seen as both? That remains to be seen. But I think the opportunity, for optometrists is to break the perception of being expensive. It's interesting in the market research for years, despite, FYI, we own our supply chain. We have private label, 2 pairs for very, inexpensive. People still saw us as expensive. So we had to tell, how do we create both that high quality, but not also the added on expensive. So there's ways to tell the story where you can say, hey, we can do that too, but here's where we really thrive and excel. And here's the difference between a personalized lens and, not, and why the measurements are so important. It's a bit of work to tell that story, but it is a compelling story. So if you can get the consumer to think that you're not expensive, that they can get value, but you have different product that others might not be offering, that's how you beat the story. But do people look at that? And if you don't give a different narrative, they're just going to assume optometrists are expensive. That market is, the research is loud and clear forever on that. Even, when, in Ontario, where there was a fee for service, by far, optometrists were less expensive than a competitive optical because of the fee for service model. People still thought they were expensive.
Oh, so interesting.
It is very much a perception play for the consumer.
What's up, guys? I just wanted to take a minute to give our exclusive partner for the 2020 podcast, the Future of Optometry series, a shout out here, Aqueous Pharma. Aequus is a Canadian pharmaceutical company with a simple mission: scour the globe for the best products and make them accessible to Canadian ECPs. The Evolved Intensive Gel is an artificial tear containing more drops per bottle than any other brand its size. Each drop is 28 microliters, which is the optimal volume for coating the eye without overflow. Its triple action formula contains sodium hyaluronate at the patient-preferred concentration of 0.2%, pure glycerol, which helps to support the lipid layer of the tear film, which is excellent for MGD patients, and cross-linked carbomer 980 that binds moisture to the ocular surface and extends the drop's residency time. As important as what's in the drop is what is not in the drop. The Evolve Intensive Gel is preservative and buffer-free, avoiding phosphates and citrates, which have been shown to sensitize the human conjunctival and corneal cells. So why do ECPs love partnering with Aqueous? Because they don't sell directly to patients, nor can their products be found in drugstores or at grocers or on Amazon. Patients can only purchase directly from your clinic or your website. Recommending ECP exclusive brands helps to support our profession, helps to build your practice, keeps your margins healthy, and keeps patients within your continuum of care. There has never been a better time to evolve your practice. To request your product samples, contact your Aqueous rep today by emailing contact@aqueouseyecare.ca. That's AEQUUS eyecare.ca. And don't forget to put the 2020 podcast in the subject line so they know you heard about them right here. And now back to this episode of the Future of Canadian Optometry series here on the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast, presented by Aqueous Pharma. So again, so that I feel like part is more on the product, right? The glasses, the eyewear, that type of thing. How about on the service side? So an eye exam costs X number of dollars in one clinic, X plus whatever on another clinic. Do you think if a consumer sees an eye exam at $80 versus seeing an eye exam at $150, do you think they perceive one to be better than the other? Or do you think that they'll just say, well, they're doing the exact same thing, but this other guy's charging me almost double? Or do you think there's other ways for us to display that?
I think if we look at the optometrist loyal consumer, which is about 30%, it probably doesn't matter much. They're going to go to optometrists they trust, and they're not thinking about the price. For those that don't have someone they're loyal to, then sure, they might ask questions about that and want to understand the difference. And, there's a segment of the population when things are are less expensive, that's a deterrent as well. They automatically assume that it's less value. But, to answer your question, up to 40-ish% of the population is gonna be driven by that. Unless they're told otherwise, they're gonna assume it's the same. And if the dollar value is material to them, they're gonna pick the lower dollar value. So the goal, I guess, is to get a chance to tell them the story. But in a lot of cases, we don't necessarily get that chance because they've already made the decision just based on, that price. If we're lucky enough that they phone and ask, then that's our opportunity to say, hey, here's what's included in, a comprehensive eye examination.
Mm-hmm. So from your perspective, as an optometrist, as the owner of an organization that, Optometry First, how much do you think a high quality comprehensive eye exam should be in Canada? If you give me sort of an average number.
Well, boy, that's a tough one. In FYI, our doctors set their fees, right? So, okay. I've seen, I don't think anyone in our organization does it for under $100, but probably the norm is around $150 for a full comprehensive, which probably includes OptoMap and OCT. In that examination is typically what we would see out there.
Mm-hmm. I know that's an awkward question, but the reason I ask is, because it's awkward, I feel like that's a question we should ask each other is, and I know we can't exactly say, hey, this is how much you're supposed to charge, but, some understanding of the value for the service that we provide. We go to school for these number of years. We get all this training and this expertise in this area. There's got to be some, return on that to some degree if we're offering that for free or some discounted rate. I think we're not doing ourselves a service as individuals, as a profession as a whole. So I'm curious to get the feeling from others when I interview them to understand, where they stand on that. And I know some may not want to answer that question. So I appreciate you, being open to it.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is, it's not a bad thing for optometrists, to to make a decent income. They deserve it. 7 years of school. And it's not an income that's out of control with other professions. In fact, it's significantly inferior, in some ways for the most part. So you are going to hear noise out there about, hey, optometrists are taking advantage of you. There's groups that are already telling that story to politicians, to anyone that'll hear the story, is that, hey, we're going to save the eye care industry. People aren't getting their eyes checked often enough because of the expense of it. And we have a study to show that. This is the kind of thing that's going to be happening in the marketplace right now, and be said in a way that we've never experienced. So if you think, we've been fighting for, making sure that our services aren't devalued, and Ontario certainly was, through the ringer, going through the ringer here. That messaging is going to be amplified in a massive, massive way going forward. And how do we know that? It's just, you look at what's happened in other markets, in other areas. You learn about the conversations that are already happening today. And that's going to be the challenge, is we're going to have to justify more and more why an exam should cost this amount of money. I will say in some of those markets, the cost of an eye exam starts with a 2 for certain optometrists, where they've really gone to that high tech, invested in their clinics. So there are consumers that will pay that for value. It's just, there is going to be potentially a larger group than there is today that's more price conscious because of how much noise is going to be made in the market. And let's face it, there's been already lots of noise about price in the Canadian market going on for a long, long time. And we've, weathered the storm. But I do believe that's going to continue to put pressure on our fees.
Yeah. I'll step on my soapbox here for a second. This is the message that I've been hoping to share with a lot of our colleagues. Is it's one thing to say, oh, it's just another, not putting names on this, just there's another low cost budget player in the market. It's all good. But the trouble is, if there's entities that have the ability to lobby in government or to go to insurance companies and show, like, you don't really need to be reimbursing this much for an eye exam, and lowering our compensation, whether it's through our MSP, OHIP, or whatever, or through what the third-party insurance providers are giving us, that's where I think the kind of, and in my opinion anyway, some of the bigger concern is that, because that affects us broadly, everybody. It's not just another competitor down the street. It's like, we're just getting paid less overall. So I'll step off my soapbox. I don't know if you agree with that, Al. I feel like you did already say some of that. And it's a matter of us all kind of getting together to understand the importance of making our profession stronger.
It's an area, sometimes, you mentioned sharing the market research, and, I'm happy to share the market research with anyone, because it makes us all better. It helps us understand. But, we've never looked at buying groups or independent optometrists as competitors. That's never been a philosophy of our organization. And it really comes down to, what are the things that are important that competitors can agree on? What's important to the patient, being the most important thing. So, it'd be interesting if we talked less as competitors and trying to outdo each other on price and, everything else. But, how do we make eye care in the Canadian market stronger, better? How do we better train our doctors? What are the things that we should be doing from a scope of practice perspective? So there are lots of things that we can all agree on out there that are good for the patient. But, our industry classically hasn't behaved that way. It's been, our group is the best, or our company is the best, and, we're going to do it our way, and, not talk to anybody. And, maybe those days are changing now, possibly. But again, we have a very noble profession that cares for their patients, wants to do the right thing. We do tests and procedures that really don't make any money if not actually go backwards, because we want to look after patients. That's important to us. And, how do we make that better? How do we make that better for the optometrists when it comes to doing those things? I think is important.
Yeah. In your particular model, actually, before I go into that question, how would you define private practice, if you were able to, versus corporate? How would you define those two things? And then where would you say FYI generally falls into that, or is it its own separate category?
Yeah, I mean, the word corporate optometry it's kind of funny. I've always been scratching my head on it. So, you
It's
know,
almost a bit of a dirty word, right?
yeah, and hey, we all have or most of us have professional corporations, and
Yeah.
I had 5 partners in my practice before FYI, and okay, yeah, it was a corporation that had 5 PCs under it. So okay, what is corporate? When you get to more than 10, is it corporate? And then what actually is it? So I've always looked at corporate optometry as tax planning. But and then there's partnerships. So, we have space sharing arrangements in optometry, true partnerships. And look at, I guess if there's going to be a definition of corporate versus not, really it comes down to who's in control of the patient care experience. And I guess for us, it's always been critical that the doctor is, even though I'm an optometrist, if I dared to suggest somebody should see another patient a day or something like that, or suggested how they could be more efficient in their examination process, that would be blasphemy. Even though, when I practice, we have the biggest practice in Canada by volume.
Mm.
So that's just not, it's considered taboo in our organization. So I've coined the word independent optometry, corporate optometry, I guess, or controlled optometry, where the doctor isn't in control. And then maybe it sounds corny, but in FYI, I call it dependent optometry. We're dependent on each other, our size and scale. We wouldn't be able to do the things that we do without all working together. And yes, you make some compromises. So in our organization, we have a board that's more financial and budgets and that sort of thing. The group that really decides what happens in our organization is our advisory committee, which is anywhere 14 to 18 optometrists. Where what are the things that we can do together? Why do we want to do that? What's the advantage of doing it? And from an operational day-to-day perspective, it's those doctors that are weighing in on what we do and what we don't do. Management from an operational, again, not from a patient care perspective, but from an operations perspective, we'll have all kinds of ideas. And that's our sounding board, and our decision-making board to say, hey, we make a case for why this makes sense to do it. And it's doctors that decide if we're doing it or not. And they're speaking on behalf of, the other doctors in the organization. So when I look at kind of, are you big or are you small or corporate or not? It's more around the governance. Okay. What's the governance of the organization? How are decisions made with respect to the practice of optometry, to the operation of the organization, to investments that the company makes? To me, that's really what defines the difference. So as independents, you get to do whatever the heck you want. The disadvantage is pricing, and it's getting harder and harder to run a practice. Let's face it. I didn't have to worry about online reputation management and
Mm.
digital marketing and Google reviews and all this sort of thing back when I practiced. Now these are all things that are an extra burden, to the optometrist. And by making some compromises and doing some things the same, I won't call it standardization, but maybe that's as good a word as any. We do have some standardization on back-end systems, even electronic medical record. But by standardizing, you can automate. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do, is create the systems and automation and investments that, really enable the doctor to execute on the patient care and feel, proud of their practice. And they still think of it as their practice. They're making the decisions around, you know, we support in HR, but they pick who they want to work with. They pick the hours they want to do. They pick the procedures they want to do, but they have support in a whole bunch of areas that they wouldn't have, as independent. So again, corny or not, like I call it, dependent optometry within FYI.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the concern with the word corporate, or at least the interpretation of it, is a top-down structure where the essentially all of the mandates come from above, and that's what everybody has to follow, kind of the marching orders. At least I think that used to be the way it is. Now perhaps there's versions of it, or evolution of that.
Yeah, I mean, there is the top down. I mean, look at the new world of business is, the goal is to be flat, right? Or, the word servant leadership or stewardship. If you have a team that really thinks that way, that's very different from a traditional hierarchical organization where, yes, the decisions are made top down and management's basically, okay, now you go make it happen. This is what we want to do, and, go make it happen. Yeah, that exists in all industries. It exists in ours. But again, the hierarchical institution is still alive and strong. But all of the best management, the gurus are, how do you create a servant leadership, culture where, we don't use the word head office, we use the word home office. We have a patient pathway, which is something we worked on for years. Just, here's the ideal patient experience, and, every touch point in the whole journey, we've defined and have a training program on. We also have a home office pathway because, the people in the lab and, in Calgary that aren't actually in clinics, well, what's our pathway? How do we create that, great experience for our doctors and their staff? And we have that spelled out, and it's a training program that has to be renewed, every 18 months. So we have a job to do in supporting the clinics and, having them see value. The big question to ask, anybody in any of these settings, and that I would challenge new doctors, people thinking of like selling your practice, whatever, is ask, what's it like? I'm just always shocked by how people will sign contracts without, asking the questions. We give a list of all of our doctors. You want to see what it's like in FYI? Phone anyone you want. I'm sure you know somebody, and
Yep.
they're going to tell you the good, the bad, whether it was a good decision or not. But we don't do that. So that's the best way for a person to figure out is ask those hard questions of any organization.
Hmm.
And new entrants, what's it like? How do optometrists work in those other settings? There's lots of answers out there, but we just have to ask the right people and the right questions.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, if there's any overarching theme here, other than supporting our profession and making sure it stays strong, is asking questions. And that's something that we're going to get to in a minute when we talk about kind of new grads and students and that type of thing. And asking questions is something we just don't do enough of, and something that I'm getting better at because I have a podcast and I need to ask questions. But we just don't ask enough questions. I don't know. We're uncomfortable. We don't want to make the other person uncomfortable. We don't want to look bad or whatever it might be, or we don't want to look stupid because maybe there's a stupid question. But there's no stupid questions. Whatever endeavor you're embarking on, whether you're buying a business, selling a business, new grad, you need to ask the questions. You have to absolutely. Don't be afraid to make someone uncomfortable by asking the right questions. Speaking of an uncomfortable question, Al, here's another one. So you mentioned, you FYI owns its supply chain, and I know that there's been some pretty significant acquisitions over the last little while, Bonlook being one of them. If I'm not mistaken, there was a frame line recently, or manufacturer recently. How do you think that, again, that middle of the bell curve, somebody who's not part of FYI, how do you think that is perceived? Is that perceived as you're the new Luxottica Essilor in Canada, or like Essilor Luxottica, however it's phrased, or how should people see that?
So, the best way yes, of course, we're doing deals and we'll continue to do deals. We're well capitalized. A quote I use in just about all of my presentations is the only way to, predict the future is to have the power to shape it. So yes, we will continue to be bold in our actions. But what I would ask people to think about is, when FY first started, we were the evil empire, a bunch of old guys, that were going to sell out and cash out. And, you know, 14 years later, what have we done to the market? Okay. Have we gone to, predatory advertising? Have we ever spoken poorly about independent practice? Have we not supported the school? Yeah, so we're making acquisitions, but we're also making the Waterloo Eye Institute happen, by giving them millions of dollars, doing the same thing, in the School of Montreal, in terms of the innovation lab. So using technology and investing in that to train better students. You did ask what are some of the things that we've done. So we supported the schools, unlike no other organization out there. And, what have we done in the profession? Yeah, we have OCTs in all of our locations, wide field imaging in all of our locations by the end of this year. We're investing in protocols. We build the dry eye, protocols. We built it, a turnkey operation. So, we often see in private practice where we buy a machine and, we don't really know how to implement and make it work for the patient and train our staff. So we're investing in all of those kinds of things, dry myopia control protocols. So, yeah, we're getting stronger. There's absolutely no question we're growing. But is that good for the profession or bad for the profession? Since we've done marketing and market research, we are trying to tell the story about how important patient care is. We're telling our database. We're talking about things that just others aren't talking about. And I believe that we've elevated the quality of eye care in Canada by making these aggressive investments, and that others are doing the same, because that's now becoming standard of care. So, again, sure, we're growing. No, we're not quite as big as Luxottica, Essilor. Like we're a tiny little mouse compared to the size of that organization. But are we going to do smart things to, benefit our practices, to make us more competitive? To be able to afford technology that really is just the economics sometimes aren't there, from what you're able to charge the patients. To be able to continue to do that because we've made other smart investments, absolutely. And I honestly don't believe, that it's been to the negative of the profession. I think it's the opposite. Have we supported independence? Will we continue to support independence? I'll be honest, early days of FYI, we would have regular meetings with two of the big buying groups. And, I tried to say, hey, here's an opportunity for us to truly do something together. We offered, the buying groups to have ownership in our laboratory. That was fledgling at that point in time. So, again, it was not in the interests of the buying groups at that point in time to really do anything, with FYI or with each other. And hey, I like to think that there's still hope, that we can talk about the things that matter. And we've created an organization, I think, that can be very helpful to independents if they have an open mindset to it.
Mm-hmm. So, you touched on it a little bit in there as far as supporting the schools. There's only 2 Canadian schools for anybody who's listening from outside of Canada. There's Waterloo, the English-speaking school in Montreal, University of Montreal, the French-speaking. Imagine that will change at some point in the future, but for now, there's the 2. A cynical person might say that these contributions, as significant as they are, Al, may not be entirely altruistic. In that, of course, the presence that FYI will have in the schools will then lead to the potential of these students, of course, choosing that as their career path. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, look at is it the driving force for why we're doing it? Absolutely no. Has it made a bit of a difference? With respect to maybe some students thinking differently about FY than they would probably, but we're talking $7-8 million in pledges between, doctors, personal pledges, my personal pledge, and the company itself. So the scale is, not exactly, if you did the math on it, it's not very good math. There's a sense of pride in our organization about that. And, we were lucky enough to be able to get together for our AGM, which we typically do every year, and the first in-person one in 3 years. And, to have the directors of the school stand up and, be so thankful and, recognize, people giving out of their own pockets significant amounts of money just because they believed in the profession that got them to where they were. They want to give back. Do we get some people that join us because of it? Absolutely. And hey, that's great. And I don't really make any apologies for that. But this is about giving back and doing the right thing. And that is the primary reason that all of the individuals and the company itself had given. If you think I didn't have to do some convincing at the board level to spend that kind of money, that would be an understatement. And even to the advisory committee. So, but again, we did it because we care about the profession. The innovation labs that we funded in Montreal and Waterloo, I would say, were game changers in the education of optometrists in Canada.
Mm-hmm. So on that, again, staying on the note of the students and new grads, there are, I don't know, I've never seen in my career that the demand that doctors are in right now, especially new grads, coming out of school. Some organizations, including yours, are offering various incentives for these new grads to join, whether there's just large sums of money, big salaries or signing bonuses or whatever things that might be happening, or forgivable loans. Do you feel that these new grads are actually in an advantageous position, a position of leverage and power, or are they perhaps being taken advantage of because they're in debt? I heard some large number, the amount of debt that students are in these days is incredible. Like, is it, I don't know. So I'm going to speak on this one. I'm going to give you my personal opinion, which is, I think it potentially can blind or obscure the path that a new grad takes and perhaps gets tied to a mode of practice that is not in the long-term beneficial, maybe for the individual or the profession as a whole.
So I think the incentives, yes, we launched our incentive, but that's sadly, that's what the market is becoming. There is going to be more competition. There is more competition, and dollars are going to be thrown around. Dollars are important, but I think a lot of people coming out, how they practice is pretty darn important as well. And I think it goes to, for us, we didn't want to be ruled out because of an incentive. And we frankly are in a position where we can do that. We have the capability, and I feel bad about it because most independent optometrists aren't going to be in that same position, or it'll be a bigger stretch for them to be able to do that. I do feel bad about that. Having said that, I also feel bad about, more commercial entities, where the control of the doctor, is in question. grabbing up our new graduates. So it comes down to, asking the right questions. So I would say to all new grads, ask the hard questions of everyone, validate the answers to those questions, um, talk to people that have been in the situation. And yeah, fortunately for them, there may be a financial tipping point when all things are created equally, and there's financial advantage. Probably they're going to go to the financial advantage. But I think new graduates want to do the best they can for their patients. And yeah, I mean, this is a wild new world for us in Canada. It's pretty new for us. It'd be interesting to have this conversation a year from now when we have some data and we can see, what are the actual behaviors of the new optometrists? Is this making a difference? Where are they going? I think the answer to those questions is still, an unknown.
Yeah. So speaking of thinking forward, imagine if you haven't already, FYI develops a pair of glasses that lets you look into the future, Al. 10 years, 20 years, what do you see for optometry in Canada? Like if you were to just imagine an optometrist going to work, assuming the optometrist is still doing the eye exams, what does their job look like?
So I think just the sheer numbers, I think optometrists are probably going to do more delegation. I think it's an amazing profession, and hey, those new graduates coming out, good for them. It's just an amazing profession where you can make such a difference in people's lives. But I think, probably technology is going to change some things. One thing we know is patients don't like the experience of booking an appointment, getting their eyes checked, picking out glasses. It's a highly stressful experience that people just generally don't like. So I think we have an opportunity to utilize technology to create a better experience. I think delegation is going to be important, whether that delegation is through staff or through some remote technology. Yeah, I think that that's going to be a reality of our profession in the future. But that doesn't take away the importance of the doctor. I think, we have to think of ourselves more as that healthcare provider, than, the refractionist or the test doer. So how do we, with limited numbers of, optometrists, there is a supply and demand. There's either going to be, we keep doing things the same way, and there's going to be more and more schools and graduates, and or we find ways to, hey, how can we utilize technology to really allow us to focus on what we're really good at and what's really important to the consumer that can't be replicated, by another person or another technology. So I think the future is bright. I think it depends on a few things,
Such as?
such as who's playing, where the money goes, and yeah, money, I hate to say it, is going to play a major role in the evolution of our profession. Whether that money is taken out, that'll have one negative role to profit takers, or if it's reinvested, and that would have another outcome. And you're going to probably have entities that do both. And that's going to be a big driver of the future. But I think scope of practice, other specialties, other treatments, not just the same eye exam we've been doing for all these years. I think there's an evolution that's going to happen a lot quicker than has happened in the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'll get you out on this one then. What advice would you give to someone who is staying on the student track here, who's considering going to optometry school, not yet in optometry, maybe is considering optometry as one of their professions? And be brutally honest here. Would you encourage them to follow this path? What would you say to them? Or if you do encourage them, what caveats or other disclaimers would you give them?
Look, I love the profession, but we got some strange stuff going on right now. And I don't mean to end on a negative, but, we have an opportunity for people to come from other countries where they've been fresh out of school and done a 3-year program up in optometry and challenge examinations and have the same privileges and title as an optometrist who's taken a minimum 7 years of training. That's a reality and a threat for today. And so if I'm a young optometrist, I'd be pretty concerned about that. If I'm a recent graduate or someone in Waterloo or Montreal, and I'm finding out, people can be brought over from the UK or Australia on a 3-year program. I don't know, to invest 7 years and go into all that debt when in such an unfair situation. So I would get students to make a lot of noise about that. And maybe that's not the answer you were looking for, but I think it's probably one of the most unfair, scary things, in our profession today. So hoping, that the right thing will be done, and invariably in that arena. I'm not confident, but I'm hopeful. But having said that, assuming, we continue to grow our scope, the opportunities are great, and our ability to help people, and fix problems almost instantly in a lot of cases is unprecedented in healthcare. So, hey, I think it's a rewarding future. A lot's going to be determined by their decisions. What do you choose? Are you asking the right questions? What's important to you? That's the beauty of the people going in. They're going to be the ones shaping the future and having the power and ability to do that. And that can be in a negative way or a very positive way, depending on, the stand they take, the questions they ask, the choices that they make.
Got it. I appreciate that, Al. I wasn't expecting anything specific. I appreciate the honest answer. And if it's negative, it's negative. At the end of the day, the point of this series of conversations is us to be as candid and open as possible to understand where we are and where we're heading. And if something needs to change, if we need to change course a little bit, the only way it's going to happen is if we actually are aware of it. So, thanks for giving that answer versus some other sugar-coated potential answer that you could have given. And, I'll give you a chance to take a minute. If there's anything else you'd like to share regarding this particular topic, where we are, what we're doing in optometry, our profession in the country.
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation, to speak my mind. I know I'm a big advocate of having hard, quick conversations. And I love it when people ask me tough questions because it shows courage and respect, that they would do that. So very much, appreciate the opportunity. I think we have to ask hard questions of each other. I think we need to be careful about the sugar coating and the storytelling, and trust our gut, and remember that if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And we have some challenges ahead of us, and we need to have frank conversations. So I applaud you for putting this together, and interested to see all of the podcasts. And again, thanks for the opportunity to give my point of view.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on, Al. I'm excited to see how it all turns out, for all these different perspectives that we're going to bring together here. So thanks again. And if you're watching or listening, don't forget to share this. Throw it up on your, take a screenshot, throw it up in your Instagram story, share it on LinkedIn, wherever you can. Tell a friend, let them know that we're having these hard conversations about the future of our profession, and make sure you stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks again, guys. Take care. Okay, so there it was, guys. The very first interview, the very first episode of the Future of Canadian Optometry series presented by Aqueous Pharma here on the 2020 podcast, Canada's #1 optometry podcast. I hope you found that just as insightful as I did. There's so many things I took away from that conversation with Al that I felt really helped me change my perspective of where we are with optometry and where we're going, and some of the things that I'm going to need to think about, we should all be thinking about moving forward. I hope you found it useful. I hope you share this with our colleagues across the country, so we can all really understand where we're heading and share these same insights that we all took away from listening to this episode. So stay tuned. Remember, every Tuesday and Friday for the next 3 weeks, there's going to be a new episode, a new interview that's part of the Future of Canadian Optometry series presented by Aqueous Pharma. I'll see you in the next episode, guys. Take care.